In 1863, Franklin County, Vermont, was known for its snow-capped mountains and the deep religious devotion of its people. Among the region's most revered institutions was the Convent of St. Beatrice, founded in 1839 by a diverse group of nuns who had come to America to dedicate their lives to divine service. For over 2 decades, the 61 nuns of St. Beatrice were pillars of the community, serving orphans, teaching children, and offering shelter to the needy. But on the early morning of December 12, 1863, something happened that defied all logic and reason. After the midnight prayers, a tradition maintained without fail for 24 years, all 61 nuns mysteriously vanished. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints in the freshly fallen snow, and not a single clue as to what might have happened. What they found in the convent that cold December morning would go on to become one of Vermont's most persistent legends. This is the story of a mystery that, according to many locals, truly happened, and of the unsettling discoveries that followed the disappearance. The tranquil convent of St. Beatrice, nestled among towering pines and constructed from the region's grey stone. The convent stood as a beacon of peace. The 3-story building reflected the golden light of sunset, its simple windows acting as watchful eyes over the community. The routine at St. Beatrice was well known throughout the area. The nuns woke at 5 a.m. for the first prayers of the day, worked tirelessly in the fields, cared for the 23 orphans in their school, and came together for the final prayers at 11:30 p.m. for 24 years without interruption. The convent's work was the backbone of the community. Mother Superior Kathina Brennan, a 48-year-old woman of Bavarian descent, led the nuns with strength and compassion. She had arrived in America in 1841 and quickly established herself as a natural leader among the sisters, who hailed from various origins: Irish, German, Franco-Canadian, and some born in the United States to immigrant Catholic families. Her voice echoed through the chapel during prayers, and her commitment to the community's welfare was widely respected. Signs of unease before the disappearance. Despite the convent's outward tranquility, there were subtle signs in the days leading up to the vanishing that something was amiss. Benjamin Hartwell, the owner of the region's largest farm and a frequent visitor to the convent, began to notice changes. After his wife Martha's death from typhoid fever in 1861, Benjamin had found solace in his regular visits to the convent, where the sisters had cared for Martha during her final days. Over time, though, the sisters became more reserved. They no longer greeted him with their usual warmth. Sister Kathina, in particular, seemed burdened, her gaze often distant, and she appeared lost in thought during their conversations. Dr. Samuel Fletcher, the local physician who had attended the convent for years, also noticed subtle shifts in the nuns' behavior. During his November visit, several sisters reported difficulty sleeping, recurring nightmares, and a pervasive sense of unease. When he suggested that it might be due to the stress of their intense work, Sister Kathina pulled him aside and whispered of strange presences in the convent. She spoke of footsteps echoing through the corridors during the night and a constant sensation of being watched, even when alone. Father Jonathan Mills, a young priest assigned to celebrate occasional masses at the convent, also witnessed unusual behavior. He noticed that some sisters seemed to be responding to voices no one else could hear, murmuring words that did not align with the traditional liturgical prayers. When he inquired about this, Sister Kathina explained evasively that the nuns were seeking a deeper spiritual communion, but her tone suggested something more unsettling. Unusual behavior and growing tension. Anna Kowalski, a 20-year-old cook of Polish descent, was one of the last outsiders to interact with the sisters before their disappearance. In the weeks leading up to the event, she observed that many of the sisters left their meals untouched, complaining of a lack of appetite. Stranger still, she sometimes found the sisters huddled together in small groups, whispering in languages she could not identify, languages that were not English, German or French. Sister Elizabeth Weber, the convent's librarian, became increasingly absorbed in ancient texts, making cryptic notes in a notebook she always carried. When Anna asked her about her research, Sister Elizabeth only replied that she was searching for answers to ancient spiritual questions. The orphans also began exhibiting strange behaviors. Lucy Patterson, an 11-year-old girl, had nightmares every night and spoke of hearing voices coming from the walls. Timothy Chen, a 13-year-old boy who had lost his parents in a railroad accident, became withdrawn and refused to be alone in any room of the convent after nightfall. As the days went by, the sisters' behavior grew even more peculiar. They spent long periods of time in the chapel outside of regular prayer sessions, sometimes kneeling for hours before the altar, seemingly absorbed in deep prayer and unresponsive when called. Other times, they were seen wandering the hallways in the early morning hours, carrying candles and murmuring prayers in hushed tones. The day of disappearance, the Sunday before the disappearance, during the regular Sunday Mass, something extraordinary occurred. In the middle of Father Mills's sermon, all 61 sisters stood up simultaneously and began chanting a song that no one in the congregation recognized. The melody was haunting and rhythmic, echoing through the chapel with an eerie resonance. The words were unfamiliar, and their voices, though harmonious, sent a chill through the congregation. Father Mills stopped, puzzled. As the sisters continued chanting, their eyes closed, lost in the unknown words. The chanting abruptly stopped, and the sisters calmly returned to their seats as if nothing had happened. The Mass continued without incident, but the event lingered in the minds of the congregation. It felt like an omen, a sign that something was about to change. That night, as the bell rang for final prayers at 11:30 p.m., the convent fell into an unnatural silence. The sisters gathered in the chapel as usual, but by morning they had vanished without a trace. The convent was eerily quiet, the beds untouched, the chapel empty, and there was no sign of struggle or disruption. The snow surrounding the convent bore no footprints, not even those of the nuns who had always walked the grounds. The place had been abandoned as if the nuns had simply disappeared. The mystery deepens. Benjamin Hartwell, upon hearing of the disappearance, rushed to the convent to investigate. What he found was an unsettling emptiness. He immediately alerted the local authorities, but despite extensive searches, no trace of the 61 nuns could be found. The building, once a symbol of serenity, now stood abandoned, its walls echoing with the unanswered questions of their fate. In the days following the disappearance, rumors spread throughout Franklin County. Some believed the nuns had been taken by some supernatural force, while others whispered of a darker, more sinister explanation. Locals reported strange lights flickering in the convent's windows at night, and some swore they heard faint, disembodied voices carried on the wind. No one could explain it, but the legend of St. Beatrice would not die. Months later, a search of the convent's library uncovered disturbing findings. Among the texts Sister Elizabeth had been studying, researchers found references to ancient rituals and forgotten spiritual practices, rituals that hinted at dark, forbidden forces. Could the nuns have been involved in something far more dangerous than anyone realized? Had they been attempting to commune with powers beyond their understanding, only to be taken by them? A legacy of mystery, the disappearance of the 61 nuns remains one of Vermont's most enduring mysteries. The legend of St. Beatrice continues to captivate the imagination of locals and outsiders alike, and the convent's once sacred halls are now seen as haunted, with some claiming to have felt a strange presence lingering there. To this day, no one knows what truly happened to the Sisters of St. Beatrice. Was it a mass disappearance, a supernatural event, or was there something darker at play? The mystery of St. Beatrice lives on, a chilling reminder of the thin line between faith, mystery, and the unknown. Staircase hidden behind a bookshelf in Sister Katharina's office. When Detective James Sullivan descended into the chamber, what he uncovered was nothing short of horrifying. The walls of the chamber were indeed covered in strange, indecipherable markings, some resembling symbols that could be traced back to pre-colonial indigenous cultures. But it was the center of the room that chilled him to the bone. There in the middle was a large stone altar, aged yet eerily preserved. Dark stains, old but strangely vibrant, marked its surface, as if time had stopped the flow of whatever had been spilled there. The altar had deep grooves etched into its surface, and in the dim light, Sullivan could make out what appeared to be burned remnants of objects almost as though something had been sacrificed there. The most disturbing discovery, however, was a collection of small mirrors scattered around the room, their surfaces reflecting light in a way that seemed unnatural, almost as if they were alive. They were identical to the mirrors that had replaced the sacred objects on the altar in the chapel. Sullivan stood frozen, the air thick with a sense of foreboding. He couldn't shake the feeling that this underground chamber had been hidden for a reason. Its contents, perhaps part of a dark secret that the sisters had inadvertently uncovered. Meanwhile, back in the convent, Dr. Fletcher's investigation into the orphan children yielded further alarming results. Despite his best efforts, the children remained in an unexplainable deep sleep. When he placed his ear against their chests, he could still hear faint, distant whispers emanating from their bodies, as though the children were hearing voices from another realm. The whispers were indistinct at first, but when he concentrated, he swore he could make out words, foreign, ancient words that seemed to call out in desperation, though the children remained perfectly still. Father Mills, who had initially tried to purify the chapel with holy water, returned the next day, still shaken from the eerie experiences of the previous evening. As he walked through the now abandoned chapel, the air seemed to shimmer, and the whispers that had filled the space grew louder. The sounds were unlike anything he had encountered, female voices murmuring in unison, responding to his prayers in an unnatural echo. It was as if the very walls of the convent were alive, resonating with something dark and powerful. Benjamin Hartwell's discovery of a letter from Sister Cathina added yet another layer to the mystery. The letter, dated December 12th, the day of the disappearance, was a farewell message written in a steady hand. Sister Cathina's words were clear. "When you read these words, we will have already departed to fulfill our destiny. Do not grieve for us, for we have found the answer we were seeking. The children are safe and will remain so while they sleep. Do not try to wake them until it is appropriate. You will know when that moment comes. We cared for you and your family with affection, and that affection will remain. May God bless you, Sister Cathina Brennan." The strange part was that the letter had appeared in Benjamin's locked house, with no signs of how it had been delivered. The ink on the paper was still fresh, even though he had been away at the convent for hours before finding it. It was impossible to explain. Meanwhile, residents of the area began to report more unusual occurrences. Mrs. Helen Carpenter, who lived about a mile from the convent, awoke at 3 a.m. to the sound of an eerie choir coming from the direction of the convent. She described the music as beautiful yet frightening, a melody that seemed to transcend time and place. When she looked out her window, she saw a soft glow emanating from the convent, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. Other reports came from Robert Chen, Timothy's older brother, who was a railroad worker. At exactly 3 a.m., all the bells in the region, including those from distant churches, rang simultaneously. The tolling lasted for exactly 3 minutes, then ceased abruptly, leaving behind a profound silence that Robert described as heavier than any noise. As Sheriff Charles Brennan arrived at the convent with his deputies, the first clues of something far more sinister began to take shape. In Sister Cathina's office, they found the hidden diary, which documented the sisters' unsettling discovery of the underground chamber months before the disappearance. It seemed that the sisters had unearthed something that had been buried in the convent's depths for centuries, something connected to the land's ancient spiritual past. The diary entries revealed that the nuns had been drawn to this chamber, a place of power that had possibly been hidden from them, as they sought answers to unspoken spiritual questions. Father Mill's exploration of the underground chamber and his subsequent fear had clearly troubled the entire convent. The final discovery made by Detective Sullivan in the chamber, the large stone altar, the strange symbols, the mirrors, and the dark stains, raised more questions than answers. Could the nuns have unwittingly triggered something ancient, something beyond their understanding? Were they now trapped in some kind of spiritual limbo? Had they sought to commune with a force far darker than they realized? The deep connection between the convent's strange symbols, the children's unearthly sleep, and the eerie events that unfolded made it clear that something profound had occurred. Whatever had happened at St. Beatrice Convent had changed not just the lives of the 61 sisters, but also the very fabric of the community around it. The mystery of the 61 nuns' disappearance remains unsolved to this day. Was it an event of divine significance, an ancient curse awakened by their actions, or something else entirely? The legends surrounding the convent have only grown over time, and the place remains a source of fascination and fear for those who dare to seek the truth behind the unexplained events that began one cold December morning in 1863. Staircase hidden behind a bookshelf in Sister Cathena's office. As Detective James Sullivan descended into the chamber, he was immediately struck by the oppressive atmosphere. The air was thick with a sense of ancient foreboding, and the stone walls seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't explain. In the center of the room stood a large, weathered altar, its surface etched with strange symbols, none of which appeared to correspond to any known language. The symbols seemed to glow faintly, as if imbued with a life of their own. The altar was surrounded by a ring of small circular mirrors, similar to the ones that had replaced sacred objects on the chapel's altar. Each mirror reflected a light that bent in unusual patterns, distorting the air around them in a way that made the room feel as though it was slipping in and out of reality. The stones beneath his feet were slick with dark stains that had clearly been there for years, possibly centuries. The stains seemed to hold an unnatural vibrancy, almost as if they were alive, pulsating with an eerie energy. Sullivan took a cautious step forward, his eyes drawn to an odd stone structure at the center of the altar. It appeared to be much older than the convent itself, its surfaces smooth and worn, but strangely preserved. He crouched down, examining the structure closely. As his fingers brushed against the stone, he felt a cold shiver run up his spine. There was something about this place, something dark, that he couldn't quite grasp. The markings on the walls seemed to whisper to him in a language older than the convent, something primal and unsettling. They depicted strange creatures and figures locked in some kind of eternal struggle, their eyes vacant and unblinking, their forms twisted and contorted in a way that made Sullivan's stomach churn. The symbols, he realized, were not merely artistic, they were part of a ritualistic design, a map, perhaps, to something far greater and darker than anyone could imagine. Just as Sullivan was about to continue his examination, a cold wind rushed through the chamber, extinguishing the candlelight and plunging the room into darkness. He stood still, his heart racing, listening to the silence. But then he heard it, the faintest of whispers, just at the edge of hearing. The voices seemed to come from all around him, whispering in a language he couldn't understand, though he could feel the weight of their meaning pressing in on him. "Do not disturb what sleeps," a voice seemed to say. Sullivan backed away, the air growing colder with every step. He quickly ascended the stairs, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the unspeakable thing he had just encountered. As he returned to the convent above, the atmosphere had changed. It was no longer the tranquil, peaceful place he had once known. The chapel now felt like an altar to something ancient and forbidden. The mirrors on the altar, reflecting shadows of figures that weren't there, now seemed to pulse with a life of their own. He couldn't shake the feeling that the sisters had not simply disappeared, they had been drawn into something far older and far more dangerous than any of them could have anticipated. The investigation continued, but the deeper the authorities delved into the mystery, the more elusive the answers became. The diary found in Sister Cathena's office only added to the enigma. The entries described the sisters' increasing obsession with the chamber beneath the convent and the unsettling visions they had experienced in recent months. Sister Cathena's final entries were cryptic, filled with references to a hidden truth and the fulfillment of an ancient destiny. She wrote of a great awakening, one that would come when the time was right, and of a force that had been waiting beneath the convent, waiting to be released. In the weeks following the disappearance, locals continued to experience strange phenomena. Several residents reported hearing the haunting choir at night, its melody both beautiful and unsettling. Some claimed to have seen a faint light emanating from the convent's windows, casting eerie shadows across the snow-covered valley. The air around the convent seemed charged, heavy with an energy that no one could explain. Sullivan, along with the investigators, had uncovered the barest glimpse of the terrifying reality beneath the convent. But the deeper they dug, the more they realized that the true nature of what had happened at St. Beatrice remained hidden, locked away in the chamber beneath the chapel, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. The mystery of the 61 nuns' disappearance was far from over. It was only just beginning.